second counts.
In the Tour de France, time is everything.
I've always felt like this was my race. Nobody was going to beat me. When I tried talking, I was gurgling blood. If somebody doesn't call 911, I'm going to die out here.
She said to me, at this moment, he's alive. Get here as soon as possible.
I was fading. Felt like an eternity.
It was horrifying.
His comeback is legendary.
He was watching his well-conditioned body just melt away.
Riders were laughing, coaches were snickering.
Greg's a real fighter. He's got a little more fire.
You never know what can happen. You never know who can beat you. The race isn't over until the finish line.
And now the historic moment. Greg LeMond in yellow.
I've had dreams of missing the start. Weird dreams like that. It was my life.
Greg LeMond, the first American ever to pull on a winner's yellow jersey in the Tour de France.
I've had dreams of just deciding to race again because I love the Tour de France. I wanted to win 6 tours. I mean, I wanted to beat Hinault and Eddie Merckx, and I really felt I had the talent to do it, but didn't have the opportunity. I realized even if I won the Tour 6 times, 7 times, it would have never been enough. It could never be enough.
The first great American cyclist was raised in a perfect place for the sport, the Washoe Valley, just south of Reno, Nevada. Greg LeMond was 13 years old when he started riding up and down these mountain passes.
I was a very hyperactive kid, and so I think that brought a lot of calmness to my life. You had a sense of accomplishment getting up to the top of a mountain, but then you had the speed and enjoyment, kind of like car racing, flying down the other side. And I like speed. I mean, that was one of the best parts about it. There was a hidden drive in me that needed to be validated, kind of really needed to prove myself. And my dad, who was attempting to lose some weight, started riding also. And it was really probably my first real connection with my dad.
Inspired by his father, Greg won the first race he ever entered. Then he won 10 more in a row.
At 16 years old, I asked permission to race with Olympic-level racers. And at 16, I was probably the best racer in the United States, even against 30-year-old, 25-year-old top-level racers.
Immediately, you can see that he had a class. I mean, a class.
Otto Jacome would become Greg's closest confidant later in life. A friend of the family, Otto's kids grew up racing with Greg.
Of course, cycling in the United States was not such a big sport or nothing like that. What I did is just encourage him.
I kind of got exposed to what the Tour de France and European racing was about. They were like this mythic figures, Eddie Merckx and all these riders. The general theme in American racing is that Americans could never compete against them. The Europeans are just too good. I just decided I was going to be different.
In 1978, Greg went to Europe with a friend whose father lived in Switzerland. He entered amateur competitions across the continent.
I raced in Switzerland, France, Belgium, and then I went on to Poland by myself. And almost every race I entered against Europeans, I won.
the 16-year-old caught the eye of Cyril Guimard, coach of the defending Tour de France champion, Bernard Hinault.
There are things that are obvious with champions, with the ones who have the potential. Either you have it or you don't.
Greg had the look of a champion, so Guimard and Hinault decided to recruit the young American.
He and Hinault came over to Reno in November of that year just to meet me, meet my family.
Imagine the Tour de France winner, you know, coming over to invite you to go to race in Europe. That, you know, that was great.
We went out quail hunting on my parents' back property, and you know, when you're hunting quail, you wait till the bird's in the air and shoot, and Hinault didn't get it. When he saw it, he shot right on the ground, and I had a BB from the shotgun blast ricochet and hit me in the eye.
We couldn't imagine a bullet ricocheting off a rock 120 feet away and coming straight back to hit Greg.
Fortunately, my vision came back, but that was my first encounter with Hinault.
Now it's a nice story. Then again, maybe it was a sign of something much graver to come.
In 1979, Greg met Kathy Morris at a cycling event. They married after a short courtship and moved to Europe, where Greg began racing against the best riders in the world.
He just was so focused, and I think he never even considered that he couldn't do it, which seems foolish when I look at it now, because it's a 1 in a million.
I turned pro, signed my first professional contract on the Champs-Élysées the day Hinault won his third Tour de France. I negotiated a house, a car, 6 first-class airline tickets, and a huge contract for $12,000.
At that time, I think in the United States, very few people even knew that cycling was a sport. When Kathy said she was going to marry someone who rode a bike, I remember my dad saying, it was like, but everyone knows how to ride a bike.
But nobody could ride like Greg. In 1983, he won cycling's World Championships.
I was 22 that time, so it was a good start.
But like everyone who rides, Le Mans was after the sport's greatest prize.
Since I was, say, 16 or 15, I had always dreamed someday of riding the Tour de France, and as my ability got better, I started dreaming about winning the race.
Cycling's much more tactical than car racing. It's just as tactical as football, basketball, just as tactical or more.
The Tour de France is a classic road race. Teams of 10 riders race more than 2,000 miles in 21 stages. The peloton, or group of riders, travels through the French countryside, over the Alps and Pyrenees mountain ranges, to the finish line in Paris. It takes superhuman endurance and a sharp mind to win. It also takes teamwork. Teammates sacrifice themselves, giving one rider the best chance to win. Riding in a line, they create slipstreams so the team leader can draft and conserve energy. They also attack breakaways by the opposition, a suicide move for a solo rider.
It's like a chess game, and that was one of my strong points, was tactics. And I've unfortunately been on a lot of teams that I didn't have the full support of my team, so I had to be even ultra smart on how I raced and ultra conservative.
Despite suffering from bronchitis for almost 2 weeks of the race, Greg finished third in his first Tour de France.
If you can step on the podium at the age of 23 or 24, you definitely have the skills to win the Tour. It is a sure thing.
He finished behind two-time champion Laurent Fignon. The other man to beat in 1985 was his own teammate, 4-time Tour winner Bernard Hinault, who was returning from an injury.
Hinault was intimidating, like really intimidating. But he was always kind to Greg. And I think he really saw that Greg was something special.
Je dis souvent que vous ne pouvez pas avoir dans un groupe.
I always say you can't have two potential tour winners on the same team because both will have strong personalities, charisma, ambition, and ego. Inevitably, you will have conflict.
Stage 17, the last great climb of the tour. Hinault had a sizable lead, more than 3.5 minutes. His young protege and teammate was in second place, when the rider in third, Stephen Roche of Ireland, launched an attack.
Being the faithful lieutenant that I was, I followed him. When we came down at the bottom of the descent, Hinault's coach and my coach, Paul Coakley, came up, basically yelling at the top of his lung that I cannot ride with Stephen Roche, that Hinault was just behind. And as I'm riding, it felt like forever. Probably 4 or 5 minutes passed, and a group of about 18 riders caught me, and Hinault wasn't with them.
You can imagine, here's a guy like chomping on the bit to win his first Tour de France, and his director saying, no, you gotta wait.
I start getting enraged because I said, they lied to me. Hinault would have lost the Tour. I got so pissed because I started imagining myself in yellow.
I'm sure Greg will say that he could have won the race if he'd have been given free rein, and he probably could have.
Greg LeMond in tears over a race he gave away.
Instead, Hinault won his record-tying 5th Tour de France. Greg took second, and a promise from his team.
They agreed that Hinault, no matter what condition he was in, the following year would be there to help me. Even if he could win the Tour, he would work for me.
He knows it's going to work for me. He said he would.
Most of the teams know their leader, but 1 or 2 of them don't. And one of those teams, of course, is La Vie Claire. Will it be Greg LeMond or will it be Bernard Hinault?
I saw his interviews change, and within about 2 weeks of the Tour, he went from I'm working for Greg, and he said, well, we'll decide who's the best rider at the first time trial, and that'll be the leader. And I'm like, you son of a...
In the prologue, the Tour's first time trial, Greg suffered a flat tire and a broken wheel. Hinault won by 40 seconds.
Hinault just decided that he was stronger than I was, which was not the case. But I kind of believed that maybe he'd still live with the promise he made the year before.
Stage 12. Hinault made his intentions very clear to Greg. He was riding to win.
Fully 2 minutes ahead, Delgado and Hinault are stealing the day's race.
Hinault built up about a 6.5-minute lead with Pedro Delgado. With about 20 kilometers to go, I did an attack on a small climb, brought back his lead from 6.5 minutes to about 5 minutes at the finish line. And when I crossed the finish line, Hinault started yelling at me that I was a traitor, that I was racing against him.
The La Vie Claire rider who told the press that this year he would sacrifice himself for his American teammate has shown LeMond and the world that when it comes to the Tour de France, winning is everything.
From that point on, it was just a battle in the team. It was divided. We had the French guys on Hinault's side, the English speakers, and the Swiss guys on Greg's side.
If I want to be frank, I probably should have never come on La Vie Claire.
The next day, Hinault was a little bit too cocky, and he went for it solo.
He was really going for the knockout. Since he was solo, I just let him go.
Without another rider, Hinault had no slipstream, no way to conserve his strength.
We caught him at the very last climb at the bottom, and I came up and gave him a little, kind of a smart aleck, how you doing? And he just grunted. Took back everything, all 5 minutes, except for maybe 10 seconds. From that point on, we were enemies.
3 weeks long. It's going to be impossible for them to keep their yellow jerseys for that long.
With a dominant performance in stage 17, Greg beat Hinault by more than 3 minutes and took the yellow jersey, the signature color worn by the rider holding the overall lead.
And now the historic moment. Greg LeMond in yellow. The blonde-haired, blue-eyed bike rider from Nevada was now leading the greatest bike race on Earth.
Turning back a century of European tradition, Greg became a target.
Jacques Godet, the organizer of the Tour de France, came up to me and said, Greg, you have to be very careful. It's very dangerous right now. Watch your water bottles and watch your bike. There's a lot of people that want Hinault to win, and they don't want you to win, so be careful. And that was from the organizer of the Tour de France, and I just sat there like, holy.
I mean, we were so paranoid. Every bite of food, everything Greg drank, we watched every single thing. We photographed his urine samples in the dope control. I mean, he put his fingerprint on everything. We were so afraid.
Was there a crash with Greg? No, no, we can't, no.
But he's all right, he's all right.
What happened? Oh,
Under the enormous pressure of the yellow jersey, Greg would crash twice in the final 4 days. But hold on for the victory.
Greg LeMond, the first American ever to pull on a winner's yellow jersey in the Tour de France.
I think, you know, with the exception of Eddie Merckx, was the most talented Tour de France rider. And I think he had his best year in '86, and I beat the best, you know. It was a pretty big accomplishment.
His name in French means the world, and this is the world of Greg LeMond in Paris today. A justifiably very, very happy man indeed. LeMond, the first American ever to pull on a winner's yellow jersey in the Tour de France.
In the summer of '86, Greg LeMond became the first American to win the Tour de France. He returned home a hero, but the victory was hollow.
Something was missing. I think it was Greg's satisfaction at just the way he won it. He just didn't want to win it that way. I don't know, it was kind of the moment we lost control of our lives.
Never experienced depression before. I've only looking back, I always pinned it on the deception of Hinault and winning something that I never really got credit for.
In the midst of his depression, Greg, Kathy, and 2-year-old Jeff returned to their home in Northern California. While celebrating Easter with family in 1987, Greg would make a fateful decision.
Well, it was, I think, the day after Easter, and at the last minute on Sunday, we decided, let's go turkey hunting. We were in a little valley that kind of had hills on the side and kind of a dry riverbed and blackberry bushes, really kind of thick. We were camouflaged, split up, and my uncle went to the left, and my brother-in-law went to the right, and I went down the center. I just had settled down into some bushes, kind of backed up against them, and went to stand up and heard a shotgun blast. Looked down and saw blood on my left ring finger, and still didn't quite compute. And when I tried talking, I realized my right lung had collapsed and I was gurgling blood. I don't know where my uncle was, and I didn't know where my brother-in-law was, but he was apparently probably 20, 30 feet behind me, because that's how I got shot. He was so distraught. My uncle came down and had to pull the gun away from him and calm him down. And, you know, I don't know how long, it felt like forever, but I had to finally yell and say, hey, I need help. If somebody doesn't call 911, I'm gonna die out here.
The nearest hospital was an hour's drive away.
I was fading. Fortunately, there was a helicopter there that came by just to see, kind of investigate what happened. He wasn't called to it. It was just by chance, and I know that saved my life. I can remember everything that happened, but it's kind of like a dream. I don't have any kind of recollection of real time, but I do remember kind of fading out on the helicopter ride.
I remember being called back over to the ER for a trauma victim, and it was a Folsom prisoner who'd been stabbed and was essentially bleeding to death, so that means that we had to move along pretty quickly to get him up to the operating room. And about that time, I remember hearing the helicopter fly in.
Dr. Sandy Beal was the surgeon on call at UC Davis Medical Center.
He had been shot at fairly close range with a shotgun, which can be a devastating injury because the pellets spread out and basically they go through everything.
Without any anesthetic or anything, they just slipped me on the side and punched a chest tube in my chest. And I remember coming off the stretcher about 5 inches. And that's the last thing I remember.
I was in the kitchen making pancakes for Jeff. It was probably like 20 to 8 in the morning. And the phone rang. This is weird, but I just remember going into the bathroom and just sitting on the toilet. I didn't want to have a huge breakdown in front of Jeff because he's just 2 years old. And just sitting there, just like sobbing. I've never cried like that in my whole life. And I just thought, you know, oh, please let him live. I do not care about anything other than just, you know, let him live.
Kathy, 8 months pregnant, gathered herself and her son and raced to the hospital.
I was inclined to open his chest because he'd lost a fair amount of blood and was still bleeding. On the other hand, I think had we done that, that would have clearly ended his career as a cyclist.
X-rays showed lead pellets in his abdomen, lungs, liver, and the lining of his heart.
There's a couple of hundred pellets, and to try to remove them all, the amount of damage you would do trying to pick out pellet after pellet would be substantial.
Basically, all of his organs were affected, and they were feeling, you know, they were just trying to close the holes to stop the bleeding.
Kathy waited for 6 hours while Dr. Beal and the medical staff re-expanded Greg's lung and tried to drain the blood from his chest cavity.
They allowed me to come up and see Greg in the recovery room. And Greg was still, of course, unconscious, but it was horrifying. He was like dripping blood out of every hole. All I see is him looking like he's dead because he's completely under and just dripping everything on these white sheets. It was horrifying.
The shock of what was happening sent Kathy into labor, 4 weeks premature.
Then that started a whole nother chain of events because Scott could not be born that day. It was too soon.
She went to a hospital right in Sacramento too. And his brother-in-law, the one that shot him, he was getting crazy trying to kill himself, so he was in another hospital. So the whole family was in bad shape in that moment.
Bicycle racer Greg LeMond is recovering from a gunshot wound in the back.
40 pieces of lead shot still lodged in his body after a near-fatal hunting accident.
I was able to get there by, I think, around noon the day after he was shot.
Kathy's sister, Mary, was a doctor living in Milwaukee. Her first stop was Sutter Memorial Hospital, where doctors stopped Kathy's labor from progressing.
Her first concern was that I go over to University Hospital and make sure that Greg was actually okay.
I remember talking to a nurse and telling her I wasn't getting pain relief. She would come in and ask what the level of pain was, and I'd say 10, and she'd just laugh, "Oh, right."
I don't know why they didn't believe that he was truly having pain. The only thing I could think of was the entire corridor that he was on. All of the other patients on that floor were under armed guard.
20 miles east of the hospital is Folsom State Prison, home to more than 7,000 inmates.
The nurse didn't believe me. You know, she was used to prisoners that were just looking for more morphine just to get high.
This is someone who knew pain and could suffer through pain. They didn't realize that his epidural catheter, which was supposed to be giving him his pain medication, had kinked, and he was actually receiving no pain medication.
I think he was very surprised with the pain and how he couldn't just sort of block it and, you know, as he does cycling, just continue. And so I think he struggled a great deal with the amount of pain. He was watching his well-conditioned body just melt away. And I think for him it was very sobering to watch this, and I think he was very frightened.
I feel really bad for Jeffrey because he thought he was going to lose his dad and maybe lose his mom. He didn't know.
You know, Jeffrey was 3 years old. He was completely traumatized by what had happened.
We thought if he could see that he was alive, that would be a helpful thing for Jeffrey. So we brought him up to Greg's room, and from the front, Greg looked pretty good. But I remember sitting next to Jeffrey when Greg leaned forward. You could see all of the pellet holes in his back, and it looked exactly like a target that you would see at shooting practice. Jeffrey was adamant that he wanted to have marks on it, spots on his back like his dad. So Kathy and I put little spots on the back of Jeffrey with a marker so he would be like his dad.
I think going through that extreme of trauma, it just changed everybody.
Greg could take all the pain that you wouldn't believe. And that's what in the sport makes the guy better or tougher. If no pain, no gain. You know, but that really means a lot. When you can be suffering and suffering and suffering, but still going for, you know, it pays.
In the spring of 1987, Greg LeMond was accidentally shot in the back by his brother-in-law near Sacramento, California.
I remember he turned to me and he said, I need to get up and see if I can walk. And he had a chest tube in, he had a catheter, he had an IV, he had an epidural catheter, and he, with me carrying all of his things, got up and walked about 8 feet across the room. He was shaking, he was white, he was in extreme pain. But after I saw his determination to do that, I knew, okay, he would go through the physical therapy and rehabilitation necessary to gain his strength back.
Bicycle racer Greg LeMond is recovering from a gunshot wound in the back.
He left the hospital 10 days after the shooting with permanent reminders of the pain, lead pellets from the gunshot.
I still have 5 in my heart, 5 in my liver, still about 35-40 in me. I lost 30 pounds of muscle mass, and just that loss of muscle mass takes months and months, maybe even years to come back.
But hospital officials say he'll be able to resume his bike training in a couple of months.
Oh, he was so weak. Like 10 or 15 days later, I think is what it was, he tried to ride his bike. He went like around the garage, and he was so tired.
3 weeks after the accident, Greg returned to the hospital for the birth of his second son, Scott. Then he gathered his family and left California for good.
Right after Scott was born then, we just got in a motorhome and we went to Montana and hid. That was really how Greg got his strength back, because before that, he couldn't walk a block. But he loved fly fishing so much that, you know, his desire to stand at the stream and fish was so great. Just kind of being the 4 of us then, I think, is what really healed us.
You know, my dad was negotiating for me to race a race in August of that year. You gotta understand, I could barely walk 300 feet 6 weeks after me being shot, and they're talking about negotiating for me to race a 12-day race. And it was a horribly difficult period.
In the spring of 1987, Le Mans cycling team La Vie Claire terminated its contract with the defending Tour de France champion. By August, he was back in Europe on another team, working to save his career and return to racing form.
It was kind of an act. It was a marketing campaign to show that I'm coming back. And I entered my first race, and I made it about a mile, literally, and had to put my hand up, let the air out of my tire, and said, God, I got a flat tire. And 2 weeks later, I was in another race. I made it about 12 miles, and again, faked a flat tire and bailed out.
He was back riding, but he just had lost so much muscle and so much conditioning. And I think in cycling, it takes so long to get to that level. They're just teeny tiny steps every single day.
I want to help as much as I can, I could.
Greg's old family friend, Otto Jacome, had become a sports trainer and masseuse. Greg turned to Otto to help him return to riding shape.
I don't know if I could have done what I did without somebody like Otto. He was my psychologist, my best friend, and he's kind of like this guy that's full of optimism. Kind of, even when you're down, he can make you feel good about yourself, and always called me the champ, like a boxer. Champ, you can do whatever you want.
He spent more than 2 years struggling to return to form. By 1989, Greg LeMond was ready to give up.
I was in the Tour of Italy, and I'd already lost 8 minutes the first day, 17 minutes another mountain stage. 2 years before in the Tour de France, I'm literally dropping guys by 15, 20 minutes. These same guys are dropping me by 15 or 20 minutes.
He told me he wants to quit. And that's what I said, hey, do it for training, and da-da-da. He said, no, you don't understand. I want to quit cycling. I don't think this is anymore for me.
I remember just saying, have you really done everything? Because I know Greg. I mean, if he didn't do everything he possibly could to give it 100%, he would never, be at peace with having quit.
I had tremendous pressure because money was going out the door as quick as I made it to support my bike company, my parents, everything.
If you've done absolutely everything you possibly can and it doesn't work out and you can't come back, then yeah, quit. That's great. We'll be fine.
Yeah, I obviously broke down emotionally, and the next day it was like I took the pressure off.
Unbelievably, in the final stage of the race in Italy, Greg finished second. He returned to France with renewed confidence.
I stated my goal was to place in the top 20 and get a stage win.
He started much better than he ever could have dreamed. In the prologue, the time trial that begins the tour, Greg finished 4th out of 198 riders.
Wow, I'm not bad. I'm pretty good.
Hey, you guys, damn Lemon is already back. Look at him, he's in good shape now.
By stage 5, Greg had the yellow jersey, the overall lead in the Tour de France.
The yellow jersey is back on the American shoulders.
We were just dumbfounded. And he was like, oh my gosh, maybe I can finish. Maybe I can even be in the top, 20.
He would wear yellow for the next 5 days until they reached the mountains. Then, Frenchman Laurent Fignon, a 2-time winner of the Tour, would take over.
Greg, that year, just basically hounded Fignon while he had that jersey. He played tactics to the T.
Greg had this capacity to rise to the occasion during the big events. If you have the will to succeed, you will.
Just 2 years and 3 months after surviving a shotgun blast to the back, Greg LeMond arrived at the final stage of the Tour de France with a chance to win. Just 50 seconds separated him from the leader, Laurent Fignon.
The day before the last day on the flat stage, Fignon came up and congratulated me on my second place. And I thought to myself, right at that moment, you're going to lose this race. You're an arrogant son of a...
Greg's a real fighter. Fignon, I don't know Laurent really well, but I see him as a pretty calm, kind of thinker guy. Greg seems to have more fire.
We both had the same coach, Cyril Guimard, and there's one thing he imprinted in my brain. The race isn't over until the finish line.
And the finish is Paris.
But Le Mans still has a 1 in 100 chance of winning this Tour, 50 seconds in 15 miles.
He was along with me. He says, I'm going to win it. I'm going to win.
He says, oh, sure you are. I know you win the time trial. I said, no, I'm going to win the race. I'm winning the Tour de France.
And I just thought, oh, come on. Don't even tell me that.
And Le Mans is away on this ultimate trip.
But I have to say, the minute I saw him riding, in the first 20 seconds, I thought, oh my God, I think he can win this.
Le Mans is a pure picture of power, approaching 40 miles an hour on this opening stretch.
It would be a race against the clock, a time trial, just over 15 miles. To win the Tour, Greg would have to beat Fignon by more than 50 seconds.
You had to fly if you want to win. It's too much time.
You know, I took 10 seconds in the first mile out of him, just in the first mile.
He averaged 34 miles per hour on his way to Paris and completed the fastest time trial ever in the history of the Tour.
Greg LeMond's time trial is over, a time of 26 minutes, 57 seconds. Kathy and her father-in-law gasp in astonishment.
Greg and the rest of the world watched the clock and waited for Fignon.
He's across the line. He's 58 seconds slower than Le Mans. Fignon has lost the Tour de France by 8 seconds, the smallest margin in the history of the Tour.
Oh man, it's like a dream. When I see the photographs even now, I don't know. If you could pick a dream of how it would end for him, you know, that he would get to that point again was just felt so good.
We were crazy. We were so crazy about it because you did something that nobody expected that you will do it.
It hit me after on the podium. I sat there kind of like amazed, like all the emotional trauma I went through and struggle and pain, and it was unreal. I mean, but it was really weird. I've always felt like once I started the Tour, this was my race. Nobody was gonna beat me. I really had that confidence that nobody could beat me if I was at my best.
From a hospital bed to the yellow jersey, and he continued to build on his legacy, winning the World Championships in '89 and his third Tour de France in 1990.
Well, you can't rewrite history, so. But had I just been able to race in '87, '88, I would have dominated the sport.
Of cycling is still up for grabs, and Cyclism Sundays will chase down the best in their pursuit of yellow. Who will lead? Who will attack? Who will be dropped? From the classics to the Grand Tours, Versus sets the pace. Cyclism Sundays, presented by Hampton Hotels. Amstel Gold, Monday at 4 Eastern.
Greg LeMond came to Paris in the summer of 1991 to defend the yellow jersey.
I was in the best shape I was in 1991 since 1986. I was better in '89. I was better in 1990.
Something in the peloton changed. It was just bizarre. Everybody felt it. It felt like the end.
Greg would struggle to stay with the race leaders, finishing 7th. Greg believes many riders that year began using performance-enhancing substances.
It was such a dramatic change and shift in cycling in 1991. It was shocking, the speeds that, you know. I don't believe world-class cyclists don't evolve. I mean, the sport is so competitive. Even to this day in 2004, training has not changed. There is no secret training method. There is no
magic a lot of people want to pretend there is, want to explain their performance by saying they train hard, they do this, they do that, but that's not true. Though I do believe, regardless of the doping problems in cycling, I would never probably race at my top because I had an inherent problem.
As his competitors were getting faster, Greg, inexplicably, was getting slower.
I always believed in being incredibly fit for the start of the season. That's what I've always done, but everything I knew before my genetics got thrown right out the window.
We just couldn't figure out why he was so tired. He just got worse and worse the harder he trained.
In 1994, he was diagnosed with a rare muscular disorder called mitochondrial myopathy.
I still debate that. I think, you know, lead pellets, nobody's ever had 40 lead pellets racing at that level, and nobody knows what kind of damage lead molecules, even small amounts, can do to the mitochondria. Mitochondria are your little cells in your muscles that give you energy, and every year that I could see that something was definitely wrong with me.
He was just healthy as a horse before 86, and after 86, he was a different person. He just never felt that deep inner vibrancy that he used to have, that deep, deep assurance of, I am strong and I am healthy.
By 1994, the first great American cyclist had been forced to quit the sport. Several years later, the Tour was scandalized by the admitted use of performance-enhancing substances by several leading riders. Without the rigors of constant training, Greg's good health has largely returned. His company, Le Mans Bikes, has thrived in the years following his retirement. He's found a new passion in the air.
Departure frequency 125.0.
It's kind of like gliding up with the Eagles, but that's what you feel like when you're coming down a mountain. You're just kind of floating down the mountain real fast.
For Greg LeMond, Paris is now a memory, a place in an improbable dream that once came true.
I wanted to win 6 tours. I mean, I wanted to beat Hinault and Eddie Merckx, and I really felt I had the talent to do it, but didn't have the opportunity. I realized even if I won the Tour 6 times, 7 times, it would have never been enough. It could never be enough.